Welcome to The Details with Elliott, Connie, and Adam Froerer. This is a podcast where we examine the intersection between solution-focused brief therapy and current topics going on in the world. And we do this because we genuinely want the world to be a better place. So enjoy and come examine the details with us. Okay, so this is a project that I have actually been thinking about for years, literal years, wanting to offer a podcast, wanting to join with my guy, and just kind of over the years evolving and thinking about how I wanted to do this and how I wanted to communicate these ideas that I think are so important. And I thought about the intersection between like the solution-focused world, the world at large, the things that I find passionate about, and eventually we got there. And now I want to welcome you to the very first episode, episode 1 of The Details with Elliott and Adam. And I'm excited. So welcome everybody.
Yeah, glad everybody can be here. It's a super exciting venture that I think that we're launching into. Elliott, like you mentioned, we have really talked about this on and off for forever, it seems like. So to be starting this is it's really exciting.
So, since this is the very first episode, and Adam mentioned the word forever, like you mentioned the word forever, how about we start at the beginning and we talk about our journey as solution-focused professionals and how we got here. And I think that that'd be a good way to set up what the details will be all about going forward. I met Adam. So I'm gonna start. I'm gonna tell my story. I'm going to see what Adam has to add to it. But I'm going to start with, you guys ever have a moment in your life where it's like, I could almost define my life as pre this moment and post this moment? Because it turns out many of the people that are currently prominent in my life, both positively and negatively, I met in November of 2008 at a conference in Austin, Texas. I would describe two of my very best friends as Adam Froerer and Chris Iveson. Also, almost equally close, Evan George, Harvey Ratner. I met all four of them at the exact same conference. And look, Adam and I couldn't come from more different backgrounds. Like I was born on the west side of Chicago. I grew up in poverty, really, in Boston, Massachusetts, which is not a great place to be in poverty when you're surrounded by people who are not in poverty. I'm an African American and have dealt with all of the plights associated with being an African American. And here I am in Austin, Texas, and a friend of mine introduces me to this guy named Adam Froerer. And at the time, we were kind of at roughly about the same age, roughly about the same time introduced to solution-focused therapy. I didn't know that I was meeting someone that completely would change my life. And I remember, one of the things I remember about that meeting is Adam and his wife had just had a baby at that time, his son named Toby. And I remember the person introducing us asking Adam about this new child. And Adam saying like, oh, the baby's healthy and Becca's fine. And we're loving having this new baby boy. And it's so weird to me to look back on that now in 2020, that son's name is Toby. And he's like my homie. Like when I go to Atlanta to visit Adam and his family, Toby's like my kindred spirit. He's like my spirit animal. And it's just so interesting. That moment completely, Adam, that moment completely changed my life. So I don't know what you experienced in that moment. But that was the onset of you and I hooking up. That was when it started.
Yeah, I think it's interesting because you mentioned a little bit about where you came from, and we've talked about probably 1,000 times how where you came from and where I came from are such different backgrounds and experiences. Being originally from the state of Utah, I grew up in a really homogeneous population, right, where everybody looked like me, believed what I believed, talked like I talked. And although I wouldn't classify myself as coming from, like a very affluent background, I would classify myself coming from a really privileged background. And I would say the hallmark of that privilege for us is education, right? So at the time you and I met, I was in the middle of a doctoral program, and that was the norm for our family. Both of my parents studied in doctoral programs. I'm one of 5 children. 4 out of the 5 of us attended graduate school. And so it was just the norm for us. And so at that point in time, I think I took a lot of things for granted about where I was. But I think at that particular moment, I had no idea what was about to shift and change in my life. And I think, again, that's kind of a hallmark of privilege, is taking things for granted. And so I, at that moment, I felt very much at home within that community, within that, that group of people. And so to meet you, I think at that time, I took for granted that your experience and my experience were vastly different. I assumed that your experience and my experience were similar. And I think, again, that's a hallmark of privilege. I learned pretty quickly that was not the case. And I learned pretty quickly that my experience would change drastically as a result of connecting with you and of finding that our work interests were so aligned. But like you, I think very similar to you, I look back on that particular moment as a watershed moment. Before that moment and after that moment, life was not the same as a result of that particular meeting.
100%. And it's funny, right? Because we were too stupid to realize what had just happened, because we actually didn't start really clicking then. No. That was just the introduction. So it took another 10 months, because 10 months later or was it a year and 10 months? Because it was
2010.
2010. So yeah. we didn't really connect at that moment. So we had just met someone that would change our lives drastically. And it took us a year and a half, maybe a little bit more, to get it. Because what happened the following, and it's super cool because we haven't talked about these things in so long. So this is really cool to me. So not the following September, but the September after that, we find ourselves at a conference. And we're unique in our age group at this conference. And we're unique in our language. Most people there, English was not their first language. It was in Malmo, Sweden. We had a friend who was with us who disappeared, and there is a total nefarious story as to how she disappeared. It is not my story, and we don't even have all the details, but there's a scandalous reason this person disappeared. But she disappeared, and I remember, I'll never forget, I'm by myself, and I'm the kind of guy, I don't typically mind being by myself. But when you're in another country by yourself, it's like a whole nother level of by yourself. And I came downstairs to attend the conference, and I can't find that friend. I can't find her. She's literally nowhere to be found. And I just see Adam, and I was like, well, what are you about to do? And Adam says, I'm about to register for the conference. So I was like, okay, I'll go with you to register for the conference and pay. And here I am, I got this credit card, and they weren't accepting credit cards. And Adam also had a credit card, and they told him they don't accept credit cards. So we had to leave the hotel and walk around Malmo and find a place where we could get cash. And we found this money exchange place to get cash. And I will never forget getting a stack of Danish kroner, this big. And it was only $400, but it was like a gabillion stack of money. That was towards the beginning of my international travel world. So I'd never had that happen before. I want $400 and you give me a stack this big of your money. And then Adam and I went back in there. And the funny thing, I was giving a lecture at that conference, and Adam has always been one of my biggest supporters. When we met in 2008, Adam and I were just kind of babies in the solution-focused world. But here we are in 2010, in September 2010, Adam is delivering a keynote about research, and Adam has planted his flag as a leading researcher in this field by then. And I had a book come out, and I was doing a workshop. And I remember while Adam was getting his big stack of Danish kroner, I was looking at the pamphlet of the conference, and at the time I was giving my workshop, some of the biggest names in the solution-focused field were also giving a workshop. And I said to Adam, no one's going to come to my workshop. I'm going to have 5 people in my workshop. And Adam, at the time, and I'm not a guy who doubts myself often, but I certainly did not think anybody was going to come. And Adam said, oh no, there are people going to come. And we bet, the Danish kroner. I'll never forget that. I said, Adam, I will give you this stack of kroner if I have more than like 10 people there, whatever it was. And Adam said, deal, I'll take that bet. The honest truth, Adam, I owe you probably $4.3 million because I lost that bet. Like, my room was completely packed. And Adam was like, you owe me money. And in the years since, we've probably doubled or nothing that bet 42 times. And I have lost each and every time. But I think the moral of the story that I've gotten is that was my first introduction, I think, to your character, because you've just always been a supportive person. I mean, I didn't know the difficulties that would lie ahead. Like, at that time, I was just doubtful because I was not Yvonne Dolan. I was not Wally Gingrich. I was not all of these people who were there. And Adam, you were like, but it doesn't matter. Elliott, Connie is enough. I think something happened in that space. Like, I think that's the seed of what is now here.
You know, it's so interesting actually that you talk about that, because that was my first international conference as well. And I remember being asked to give that plenary address and being really overwhelmed. I think similar to the way that you were feeling, right? Of like this being kind of a stepping out of obscurity into somewhat of the spotlight and not really feeling very prepared to take that step. And one of the things that I remember, because again, before going to this conference, I was coming to this conference from Chicago, Illinois, and I didn't know anybody else who was there.
Right.
And so really kind of as a security blanket, and it sounds really strange, right? Like I am grown, I was married, we had 2 children. My wife was actually at that point pregnant with our 3rd child. And as a security blanket, my mom loves Europe. And so I said, you got to come with me. And she came.
I forgot she was there.
Yeah, she came with me simply and hung out in the hotel for, a week, just because I was like, I'm not going by myself. You got to go with me. And it's interesting because obviously she wasn't interested in the conferences. Is not her field of study or anything. But of course she like sneaks into the conference because she's going to listen to me give my talk. And I remember looking down actually, and the 2 people who are sitting on the front row, nobody sits in the front row of a big plenary, but the 2 people sitting on the front row that day are you and my mom. And I remember being really grateful that at least the 2 people that I knew, at least they were sitting on the front row. And then I worked for the rest of the conference, or I worked for the rest of that talk, basically to look over your heads and be like, I know they're there, I know they're supporting me, but I can't look at them or else I'm going to completely like either bust up laughing or forget what I say or whatever. But I think, again, it's that in those beginning moments, right, where we don't even know each other, we had that exchange back and forth about, 4,000 kronar. And that was enough for you to come up. I know you are not a front row person. I don't think I've ever seen you on the front row ever since.
Nope.
But that small exchange was enough for you to say, I'm gonna throw my hat into this ring. I'm gonna go sit up on the front row. I'm gonna be supportive. And I think that moment is really also a defining moment of what this interaction has always been like since, right? In essence, you've symbolically been sitting on that front row saying, I know you're nervous about this. I know you feel out of place in this situation. I know you are doubting whether or not you can do this, but I'll just sit here on the front row and, in some sense, be your biggest supporter.
100%, like 100%. Biggest fan, bro.
I think since then, there are many times where I'm like, I want to get up on that stage. I mean, not the literal stage, but there are many times where I'm like, why'd you put my name in that email? Why did you throw my picture out there? Stop doing that. But in some sense, it's always been you saying, I'm sitting on the front row. I'm going to support you, even though you may not want to do it.
Absolutely. And it's funny because, like, I think when you just like listen to God's path, right? And who knows, maybe you like whatever your origin is of believing like who orchestrates the world, when you just follow the path, it's just different. Like the situation is different. And it became clear to me Solution focused brief therapy, like at the time, you and I were reading some of the same books and knew some of the same people, and all these kind of common techniques and theories associated with solution focused brief therapy. And there were certain things about it that I was rejecting, but wasn't really saying it out loud to people because, you say things that are counter to the norm and you end up, being the like black sheep of the community, which nobody wants to be. And, Adam and I, at the end of that first day of that conference, went for a walk. I actually think we were looking for food, but we left the hotel and we're walking around Malmo, Sweden, which is a city I love, by the way. The Malmo city center is like, if I just drop you in the Malmo city center, it just feels like Europe. And we were walking around that city center, and I don't remember which one of us did it first, but one of us said, and I'll never forget, it was the idea of tapping on the shoulder. Like solution focused brief therapy had this thought of like, you tap your client on the shoulder. And one of us took the first step and was like, I don't understand what that means. And I think that's a poor description of what we're actually doing in the clinical room. And then that like opened up the doors of us talking about like what we agree with, what we don't agree with, and what we think should be altered and changed or explained better. And not in a critical way, like not criticizing anybody who come before us, but we walked for hours just talking about solution-focused therapy. And we set up our very first project. You being the researcher that you are, like, we should do a Delphi study and we should do this and we should do that. And we've been meeting weekly ever since September of 2010. And it started with that walk. It started just taking a walk and I think that's so symbolic to me because you've been walking with me step by step ever since. We have walked into situations where I've experienced racial discrimination in the solution-focused field. I've experienced judgment and envy due to my prominence, success, or whatever you want to call it. And just like Malmo, like we're just walking side by side the entire time. Like there was never a moment where I questioned whether or not Adam was standing beside me. Sometimes literally, and other times figuratively, but you were always there.
Yeah, I think one of the things I remember about that time where we were walking around Malmo is obviously we were there with a bunch of people that at that point then we had gotten to know, right? Or we had at least met. So as we were walking the streets, we would periodically run into somebody else from the conference and we would stop and chat with them for a minute. And one of the things I remember is that none of those people would invite us, right? They'd be like, hey, we're going to eat. Do you want to come and eat? And each time, even without really thinking about it, we just kind of both said, no, we're just going to keep walking. I can't even remember if we did eat. I just remember walking around and talking about a lot of those concepts like tapping on the shoulder or leading from one step behind or those kinds of things. And I think one of the things that conversation did is that it allowed us really quickly to see, even though we come from really different backgrounds, even though we didn't ever have one, instructor or teacher in the same, what we had done is we had read, like you mentioned, a lot of similar books. And without ever even talking about it, we had come to very similar beliefs, very similar ideas about this process and what it should look like. And one of the other things that really kind of stood out to me is that we both really valued watching this work. I remember you telling me that you had already started recording yourself. And when you would write your case notes at the end of the day, you would just turn on one of those sessions that you had done that day and you would start listening to it and basically say, I would figure out what I had done that I didn't want to do again. And then I would make sure the next session that I did, I didn't do that.
Right.
And that's when I had done, some of the microanalysis research. And that was when I was in the midst of doing my dissertation. And my whole dissertation was based on kind of minute, tiny little details of watching sessions. And I remember both of us saying, there's no way you can learn this without watching in detail how to do this. And so I think our belief in how to evaluate the utility of this immediately lined up. But that wasn't the only thing that lined up. It was every single point that you made. I said, yeah, yep, I totally agree with that. And every time I said something, you were like, I absolutely agree with that. And so I think it just, despite all of the potential differences that we had, in this arena, it was like a hand in a glove. It just fit beautifully from day one. And ever since then, it just seems like every evolution of thought that we have, we just are in sync with where that thought should be going. And I think a huge part of that is because we, to this day, 10 years later, continue to watch. And so we just are continuing to notice very similar things because we just keep watching the same things.
To add to that, I think what we do really well, and I always use examples. There was MTV used to they used to release these CDs called, I think they're called mashups. And Jay-Z did one with Linkin Park.
Yeah.
And they did them with a bunch of different, like, two bands that should not go together, like two musical entities, that should not go together. And literally they would like mix their songs. And, this was just a thing. They were produced by MTV, and you could go to the CD store back when CD stores were relevant. You could buy these things. And Jay-Z and Linkin Park was by far the most successful one of these mashups. And in an interviewer asked Jay-Z, why did he think the Jay-Z Linkin Park mashup was so successful? And he said, because we didn't compromise. I showed up as me, and they showed up as them. And it allows us to be like, you bring what you bring, and I bring what I bring. And in that authenticity, something magic happens. And that's 100% what I think about with you. Like, you are somehow flexible while simultaneously being uncompromising in who you are. And I have not compromised who I am. And then something magic happens as a result of that authenticity. And I think that's how we've grown, because like, I will give you honest feedback. I'll tell you my true feelings about a thing, and you do the same. And somehow, in that example, I would prefer to be Jay-Z and you be Linkin Park, but somehow
I'm totally gonna say I'm Jay-Z.
But somehow, like, you showed up in your authentic way. And I can only accept or reject you when you are being authentic. And I can only trust you and receive you when you are being authentic. And in that authenticity, magic happened before we even knew it. Like, I don't know that either of us knew it at the time. Like, at the time, walking around Malmo, I knew I'd met a guy that would be a friend. And I knew I met someone I would do work with. But I didn't know I'd meet a guy that I would, like, stay at his home. Like, we got lots of friends that we see at conferences or stuff like that. But I didn't know that, like, this would happen. And I think, we're in a world right now where there's so much focus on the differences, and somehow there's like this very clean pathway from difference to divide. And I think that didn't happen with us, even though eventually people showed up that tried to make us focus on those differences and tried to make us be divided. But when you're being your authentic self and you just kind of follow the path, magic happens. And I can only describe like what is happening as magic. Like, at that time, who would have thought that you and I would be leaders in the solution focused field? Who would have thought that I would be the most followed person in the solution focused field? And it's just like, magic happens when you're just being yourself and you're just living authentically. Like, magic happens. And if there's one thing I want people to get from like listening to our story and like knowing about our story, is when you're authentic, you open yourself up for magic. If I had focused on what made Adam different, like nothing, like it wouldn't have happened. If you had focused on what made me different, like it wouldn't have happened. But not only were we not focused on it, we weren't even aware that we were supposed to be until like years later. You know what I mean? Like, it's to be a part of this story, Adam, is one of the greatest pleasures of my life, because it almost seems like it happened to someone else. You know what I mean? Like, it's almost like that wasn't real. Like, it just wasn't real.
Yeah, I think you're spot on. I think both of us, without really even noticing, just kept being who we are. I think that's a huge component of this process. There was, for as unsure as we were about stepping into the limelight at that point, we really didn't question who we should be in that process, right? We each just kind of held on to, this is who I am, take it or leave it. And
Right.
I think that's a huge important thing. But I think the other thing that's really valuable, so you really talked about, right, we didn't compromise, but I think even one step beyond, we didn't compromise, we truly appreciated in each other what we were bringing to the table, right? I remember, I mean, very shortly after that Malmo conference was the conference in Bakersfield, and we didn't really even know each other very well, but
No.
we decided in Bakersfield. I remember two things in Bakersfield. One, we decided to do the Delphi study then, but we also said at the next one we should present together. And I don't even know why we came up with the idea to present together, because I don't know what we thought we were going to present about. But I remember at the Bakersfield conference, really the only thing we did is we showed a session of you doing what you do, which is obviously magic. And then I just asked you a bunch of questions about, why did you do this? And what were you thinking about this? And how did you decide to go here instead of there? And basically I just did what I do, right? I just ask a bunch of annoying questions. And
Which is obviously magic.
and
But annoying.
but that right? Like I just continued doing what I do, and you just continued doing what you do. And again, I remember that's one of those times where we doubled or nothing, and you said nobody's going to come, and I said everybody's going to come to this, and I made double my money that day. But I remember it being so easy because I completely was in awe of what you do. And I really just wanted to like pull it apart and be like, how do you do this magical thing you do? And I remember you saying to me when we were talking on the phone, preparing for that, how do you come up with these questions? How do you even know what to ask? And I was like, I don't know. I just ask what's on my mind. And I remember getting the impression, for better or worse, that you were impressed with me and I was clearly impressed with you. So
Absolutely.
I think we didn't, not only did we not compromise, but from the very beginning, we saw the magic that the other person was bringing to this partnership.
I think that's absolutely true. And I think, and I don't think it's an avoidable topic right now, but like Adam is good at a skill that I am truly in awe of, and I do not have it. Like I couldn't do what he does. Like he used the phrase pull it apart, but I can't look at a therapy session and with scientific measures set up research studies that scientifically pull it apart. Like Adam is not sloppily, he's like scientifically pulling things apart. I can't do that. Like I am in awe of his ability to do that. And I think a lot of times the successful skills of one person create like envy, jealousy, criticism. But there's nothing wrong with acknowledging, like, I can't do that thing. Like that thing that I just saw you do, I'm in awe of your ability to do it. And there's no negative. It's just like, I'm a fan. Like, I just don't know how Adam does what he does. Adam has a way of making everyone who he teaches better at therapy. And he has a way of making therapy explainable via research and science that I could literally attach myself to Adam's hip for a decade, as I've done, and not learn how he does it. Like, I don't get it. But it's perfectly reasonable and okay. And I sometimes think, imagine what would happen if, as a culture, white people looked at Black people and said, you guys are amazing at, like, your culture has this magic in it. Or if men looked at women and said, like, you guys, you have this magic within you. Or if Europeans looked at North Americans, like if the Western world looked at the Eastern world, like what would happen if we just started looking at people different from us and found their magic instead of reasons to be fearful?
Mm-hmm. And I think also, right, in all of those examples of what's happening, right, instead of being threatened by the difference, being in awe of the difference and say, I may never master that difference. I may never even get good at that difference, right? I personally know I'm never going to be the clinician that you are. The questions that come out of your mouth, I'm like, how in the world did he come up with those questions, right? But that difference, even though I can't do it, I don't ever expect to be able to do it. I can say, I realize that your ability to do that makes my ability to do what I do even better, right? And I think again, going back to the world at large, if instead of being threatened or being afraid of or feeling less than another culture, if we reached out and said, can I just be in awe of what you do? Can I just appreciate how you do this? That appreciation in and of itself, I think, could heal so much of the division, so much of the divisiveness that's around. Because now we are, if we could get to that place of appreciation, you also get to the place of gratitude, right? Where it's like, thank you for giving me the gift of being able to enjoy this. It is an honor to be able to watch you do your work and to have you share it with me, right? It's such a vulnerable place where you could be like, I don't want anybody to see this. I don't want you to experience this, or I don't know what your reaction is going to be as a result of this. You could keep it all to yourself. And so in some sense, honoring the difference also leads to gratitude for, thank you for making yourself vulnerable. And I think right now we're in a self-defensive place in so many instances where we say, I'm not going to make myself vulnerable in front of you because I have no idea what you're going to do with it.
That's absolutely true. I think that's the magic, is just like just being vulnerable and being yourself and showing up in that real, true, genuine, authentic place. Magic happens, like genuine, true magic happens. So look, I want everybody who can hear this to just go off and notice other people's magic, because I think it'll change your life. But before we go, Adam, there's one story you have to tell. When we went on that walk in Malmo, I almost killed a little Swedish kid. Adam almost, in our very first little walk as we're talking about all these things, Adam almost witnessed me murder a little 5-year-old Swedish kid. So Adam, you got to tell that story before we go.
Yeah, I think this is where I really got to know you and the real you. I remember you had, at that point, right, in 2010, baggy pants were the thing people wore, and you had on, this nice crisp pair of jeans that I later learned cost like $130, and and you had on these brand spanking new pair of Air Force Ones, and it was, and we crossed the street, and you were like tiptoeing, and I was like, what are you doing? And you're like, I can't get my shoes dirty. And I was like, what good are shoes if they're not touching the ground?
Such a bad way to describe shoes, by the way, but whatever.
But we're walking along the sidewalk, and the sidewalk is not wide, right? So if we could, the two of us walking side by side could barely fit on the sidewalk. And coming the opposite direction of us is 3 generations, right? This little boy, he's like 5. His mom is, I'm guessing, and then his grandma. And so the 3 of them are walking towards us, and this little guy is pulling a beautiful cherry red wagon, right? And I don't even remember what was in the wagon, but he was pulling that wagon like it was his prized possession. And so we had really nowhere to go. We clearly are the ones who had to step off of the sidewalk because the wagon was not going to go off the sidewalk. So I stepped off the sidewalk into kind of some gravel, and it was kind of muddy and dirty. And I looked over and I could see Elliott having this personal dilemma of, do I step into the mud with my perfectly white shoes or do I not? And he got basically 1 foot off, and he just couldn't bring himself to get the other foot into the dirt. So he was kind of on the sidewalk, kind of not on the sidewalk. And this little guy walked right past him, and this red wagon just brushed the pant leg of Elliott's jeans. And I didn't really think much about it. And then they walked by about 4 steps. And then I thought Elliott was going to explode. He starts hollering And I look over and there is this perfect straight line of red paint on the leg of his jeans. And that red wagon apparently had been freshly painted. And I I had known Elliott about, I don't know, maybe 24 hours, and I had to talk him out of beating up that little the little Swedish boy. And and I had to say, you got to walk on. And then for the next 20 minutes, he said, I'm going to have to throw these jeans away. I've only worn them twice. I'm never going to be able to wear these jeans again.
That is so true.
So all of a sudden, the jeans became much bigger deal than the white shoes.
Such a terrible, terrible situation. I remember looking at that kid thinking, if I murder him, will I be in trouble?
I remember thinking, if Elliott murders him, am I going to get in trouble?
Yeah, man, you were there with me. So there's a consequence. There's a consequence.
You know, I've asked a similar question many times. If Elliott does that, am I going to get in trouble?
And, you know, I've had to ask myself that a couple of times too. I've dragged you into some stuff, but, you know, Adam, walking this journey with you has been the greatest privilege of my life, honestly. And it's also been cool to, like, share it with the world in such a, like, vulnerable, like, unfiltered place, right? So, look, that's it for episode 1. Hope you guys liked it. Hope you guys enjoyed it. And hope you love our new podcast, The Details, where Adam and I are going to get into things and find the place where the world and solution focused intersect and try to leave this world a little bit of a better place. And I hope we did that today as we invite you guys to, like, when you meet people who are different, notice their magic, because it'll change your life.
Yeah, thanks for listening to some of our details, and I hope this will lead you to looking closer at your own details, but also being appreciative of what other details other people share with you.